Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks all for being here. Just real quick, I'm going to let each of our panelists just briefly introduce themselves, let you know what their background is, especially as it pertains to this topic. So I'm just going to go the order I have my screen. So let's start with Allison.
All right, that's 5 panels, and 5 panels will be starting. It pays to have a name, I guess. All right, so I am Allison Hymas. I am a writer of middle grade mystery and adventure books. My latest book is called The Explorer's Code. It's about 3 kids who solve a mystery of an old house. But the reason I am on this panel is because my next book, which is I'm under contract with Merlin, comes out next year. And it is about 2 boys who accidentally raised essentially Cthulhu. And now they have to put that thing back where it came from, or so help me. So that is why I am on this panel.
Good Monsters, Inc. reference. Excellent. Okay, Benjamin.
So I'm Benjamin Hewitt. I write contemporary middle grade fantasy and science fiction, all 3 separate. I work for NASA, but I'm not here representing NASA today. I'm here just for fun. I translate for NASA. I translate English into English. And so that's a fun job. And then I enjoy spending time with my kids, and I juggle fire.
Nice. Wow. Stop that. Okay, we have G. Scott Huggins.
Hi, I'm Scott Huggins. I write adult science fiction and fantasy. Adult in the sense that adults read it, not in the sense of adult science fiction and fantasy. But in any case, my longest humorous work is All Things Huge and Hideous. This is not even a copy of the book. It is a pillow that vaguely resembles the book, but it is essentially about a veterinarian who is enslaved by the evil Dark Lord, think Sauron, and forced to make sure that the dragons and the werewolves and things stay healthy.
That's a All Things Great and Small reference.
All Things Bright and Beautiful. Yes.
Bright and Beautiful. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
All Creatures Great and Small.
Yeah,
that's the next one.
Yes. Yes, my main characters' names are in fact James and his and Harriet, his assistant. James and Harriet are the veterinarian and the veterinary assistant, and they try to not die while they are doing their jobs. And it's self-published at the moment, originally by a small press that went bust, but it's on Amazon.
Awesome. All right, Heidi. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Heidi Voss. I write speculative fiction. I have a YA novel that's coming out, but I think as the more I write, the more I tend toward kind of more adult. Again, not like adult, but for adults. I just updated my website, authorheidivoss.com, so you can go there and download a short story. So if I'm talking about humor and you're like, I don't know if this person really knows about humor, you can go read my story. And then if you're like, that's funny, then I know what I'm talking about. If it's not funny, ignore everything I've said. I'm also, so the YA book that's coming out, it's called Frogman's Response from the Wild Rose Press. We just got a cover, which is very exciting. So I just updated that on my website. And I'm also working on a YouTube storytelling series about a robot who dreams. I hope that happens. There's a lot of projects that I've had kind of in progress that have been held up for various reasons, like a D&D camp podcast I was part of that we had to stop recording because the pandemic hit. So the best way to keep up with that, I know some people have been able to do it through Zoom, but the guy who was running it was into tech, and so he had to fly all over the country because everybody was using tech all of a sudden. But anyway, that's me. That's what's going on with me.
Awesome, thanks, Natalie.
I'm Natalie Brienne. I write whatever I feel like. Recently that's been historical fiction. I also have a sci-fi fantasy project that I work on when I get bored with historical fiction and want to make stuff up instead of researching and then realize I have to research anyway. And I have my first novel coming out next month, almost to the date, on March 16th. It's called Constantine Capers the Pennington Perplexity, and it is a gas lamp historical romance mystery about a detective with short-term memory loss, which is humorous because it is ridiculous. And so some funny things can happen with that. So I guess that's why I'm here. Other than the fact that I love humor, I am currently in a class totally focused on humor and satire. And so hopefully I have a sense of humor.
Nice. Well, thanks. Just quickly, I'm Michael D. Young. I put the D because I realized when I was going to school at BYU, there were literally 9 other Michael Youngs just going to school with me at the same time. So I'm like, I better put the middle initial. I also do fantasy and sci-fi. I do podcasting with different poetic projects. I'm a musician. And my latest humorous, or my latest manuscript I'm working on is a humorous work called My Mom, the Necromancer. Where a boy comes home one day and finds out that his mom is indeed a necromancer who uses the undead to help her with the housework. So very fun. It's a fun, very lighthearted sort of fantasy. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump right in. Talk about humor and fantasy and why specifically humor and fantasy often go so well together. So let's just to break the ice. Let's have people go around and share what is your favorite fantasy work, either in any form, novel or short story, whatever, that you think uses humor in the best way.
Oh man, so
there's a lot.
I'll go for it. So, Michael, one of the biggest things I love about fantasy, and then I'll tell you my favorites, is that it gives us a new perspective to see our world more clearly. And some of you guys might be familiar with Strange Planet, which is a cartoon by Nathan Pyle, which shows aliens who are like your shirt, by the way, Scott.
Thanks.
But it shows these aliens like. There's this one for Valentine's Day, and it's this guy, and I drew a fatally wounded critical organ, and it's funny because a heart with an arrow through it is supposed to symbolize love, and fantasy is a great way to exaggerate or to bring our world into perspective. And in that context, I think, and I'm sorry, Allison, you didn't want to go first, so I'm stealing this from you. Is Terry Pratchett, and
Yes.
And I know Allison's going to hate me because we've talked about this before, but Terry Pratchett, like he does so much that's funny, like in his work, he's got personification, like, there was a vitamin crying because it was all alone in this meal. And like, he talks about human foibles and taboo and superimposition of, again, what we're talking about here of our culture into a medieval setting, giving us perspective. And so that's my top, I think, probably.
It'd be hard to talk about humor and fantasy without mentioning Terry Pratchett. So,
yeah.
Any other thoughts? What are your favorite humorous, fantastical works?
Can I say The Princess Bride?
Yes, Princess Bride.
Absolutely.
That one. And I'm talking specifically also about, the movie is fantastic, but the book, that confused me for a solid year because I was like, wait, is this an actual, abridgment of a different book? Meta text and all the conversations about how this was after Stew, but everything's after Stew.
No.
After Stew, but before democracy or whatever he says. And one thing that I enjoy about fantasy, humor and the fantasy, and I'm definitely going to draw on the Terry Pratchett thing, is how it does let us exaggerate things, but it also lets us take the completely normal things and then just rip them out of context. Like The Princess Bride, it's just a normal fantasy adventure love story, and it just shreds that in so many ways because with the characters that we have and with the book, it's this meta commentary. And with Terry Pratchett, he's got a book about running a bank, and that's got to be the most boring thing in the entire world. but the way that it's done, the way that it's cute, like the way that he describes how banks work and the weird little nuances of the policies, how interest works and everything, making fun of all the different elements that we just take for granted as just normal parts of our life, but showing the absurdities of them and then exaggerating those absurdities with fantasy, that's what makes it just hysterical to read.
I think one of the things that's so amazing about Terry Pratchett, I mean, my favorite Terry Pratchett novel is Thud. And there's so much that's hysterically funny in that novel, and yet when you get to the core of it, it's an absolutely serious book. I mean, he uses humor to cut right to the heart of some of the most serious issues about, why do we believe that, we must fight other people over these issues. However, I'm going to bring in somebody who's a little less well-known. Dan Mcgirt wrote a series about a hero named Jason Cosmo that just was, it was just wacky fun because he just metafiction the hell out of it. So, at the beginning of, I think it's the third book, the eye candy twins who have been with Jason for the first two books are like, it's time for us to leave because, we're just the eye candy that we can never be your true love. And this is the third book in the series. So goodbye. It's like, no, wait, no. And they take themselves out for, not only break the fourth wall, but just pretty much, walk out, stomp around your living room for a little bit and then, expose all the wires. That's so much fun.
That's not a good thing. I'm sorry.
As far as, you've talked about a lot of my favorite books. I was going to bring up Good Omens, which is a little bit more contemporary fantasy.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah, but still just, I don't know. I think that in a lot of cases, because fantasy, you can kind of do things that aren't normal, do things that are unexpected. With humor, there are lots of different theories of humor. But one of them is that you take something that is recognizable and you kind of turn it on its head. And that is what creates the humor, at least in that theory. And so, I don't know, having it so that the angel and the demon, who are, complete opposites, be best friends and working to stop the end of the world when, all the other angels and demons aren't, it feels like, it just the premise is funny, and you can do unexpected things that, that just the absurdity of the situation is odd. One of my favorite books growing up, I wonder if I have it on the shelf. Oh, right there. Igraine the Brave. Her parents turn into pigs, and just that situation is, it's middle grade. Cornelia Funk. I loved it as a kid. It has great illustrations.
Yeah.
But it, there's a talking cat and the parents turn into pigs, and there's just a ridiculousness all about her parents being pigs and her trying to stop them from being pigs and whatnot, where there's just an oddity from the absurdity. Roald Dahl has a lot of fantastical elements in there and interweaves tons of humor into his work too, if we're looking, more middle grade stuff.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of it, what we've talked about.
Sorry, real quick, I want to.
Right ahead.
Yeah.
Good.
I agree. Roald Dahl is a great example. Ella Enchanted is another one that's kind of in that. Gail Carson Levine is hilarious. The situation of a fairy godmother is going to bestow a gift on you, and that's the gift of obedience. And I feel like not only is that a situation that I feel like a lot of girls feel like they're in sometimes, but the ways that she tries to get around it, the ways that she's trying to live her life as a person who's gifted with obedience. And then some of her other stuff, I'm thinking of Fairest, where she's got, it's and fantasy asking these questions of what would happen if somebody had to obey every time somebody told them to do something? And what if Snow White wasn't pretty? What if the story was a little bit different? I mean, if you're doing retellings. And then a little bit more contemporary, I like a lot of comics. The Devil is a Part-Timer is one that I picked up recently, where I saw that it was on Netflix. I wasn't that interested in it, but then I picked up the comic. And it's about like this demon lord that's trapped in the human world. And as he's trying to figure out how to get back, he has to work at a fast food restaurant. And it is hilarious. I'm very into that. And I have a few others I wrote down. But sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've seen it, and I'm just going to back you up. That is absolutely hysterical. And you should, if you're interested in humor, you should watch that.
That's awesome.
Go read it.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into the other ones because we're just doing one for now. But I thought those are the two I wanted to bring up.
Nice. So I was going to say a couple of people have mentioned how one of the things that makes fantasy humorous is kind of subverting the expectations or the tropes of fantasy in a clever way. What I remember is that wasn't a book, but I remember watching there was a TV series called Gallivant. And they did this really well, where they took fantasy tropes and they turned them on their heads. There was a monastery, and instead of the monks taking a vow of silence, they took a vow of singing. And so they had to actually go around singing everything. And Weird Al was the head monk, so that was especially funny.
I've got to see that.
It was,
of course, he was
fantastic. So, what I want to open up to the panel. What is your favorite subverted fantasy trope that you've seen really land for you, like that?
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to mention Buffy at some point. Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
Very funny. I mean, it's not a book, but whenever I think of subverted tropes, that's a pretty big piece of fiction there.
So what is there a particular situation that you're thinking of that is a good example of
just the premise of the girl who is helpless and weak and gets killed in the horror movies, and that's kind of what it's built on is we're taking that cheerleader type, and instead of her being the victim, she is now the slayer, and she's killing all the vampires. So
excellent.
And there's and we have, I mean, this is later, we talk more about like why fantasy can bring even funnier situations, and I feel like that's a really good example of, sort of that the very like day-to-day kind of things that we're worried about, and exploring that in a very extreme environment. So, you walk into a room and there's a huge monster, and he splatters blood on your shirt, and you're like, this is my favorite shirt. And, that kind of stuff is very...
Hyperbole, yeah, totally. What any others? That's a great example.
Pretty much anything Patricia C. Reed does in her Dealing with Dragons books, where you have absolute, fantasy things happening, and then you have the most practically minded people interacting with this. So you have the knight showing up like, I'm going to rescue you from the dragon, and that the princess is supposed to be like, oh yes, take me away from here. And she's like, no, because I have to clean the kitchen. Or Rumpelstiltskin is taking kids because nobody can, all these miller's daughters can't guess his name, so now he's got all these firstborn children, or all these around him, and he doesn't know what to do with them. Also, the heroes are like, well, why don't you start a school? Now you can take care of these kids. And so, I think my favorite is high, crazy fantasy stuff, and then the one person who's got a common sense mindset, which is probably why Flynn Rider is my favorite character in Tangle, because he's the only one who suggests that it's strange to sword fight a horse.
Mine's also the one that questions why everyone's singing.
Yeah.
Here's one, not book, but because when you think of medieval fantasy magic, you think of Merlin, and of course Merlin, BBC Merlin. It's not the wizened old wizard who is helping Arthur, who's a small, in Sword of the Stone, like a teenager or whatever. This is Merlin, who's even younger than Arthur and has to hide his magic. That is kind of completely turning the mythology on its head in a way that can be really humorous when he's trying to hide his magic from Arthur right in front of him. as things go on. So I think that's a very interesting reversal of, but also at the same time poking pointing out like the things that come up in the mythology where he does turn into an old man. It's like, oh, well, there's old man Merlin. So that's why it's in the mythology, kind of showing, or any situation where it explains the mythology through something that is completely unrelated, but like you can kind of connect the dots because over time with the game of telephone of culture, that things just kind of trickle down into, prophecies or whatever.
Speaking of prophecies, go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, to springboard off that, one of my favorite subversions of the trope is Alan Dean Foster, who's mostly known for science fiction, wrote a fantasy series called Spellsinger. And, his world, it's a portal fantasy, and this college kid gets zapped into sort of a Narnia-like world with talking animals and magic and everything. And the first time he sees his mentor do a transmutation spell to turn things into gold, and his mentor's like, using these words and saying, yeah, I need a pinch of Californium-234. And the kid's jaw drops open. It's like, but those magic words mean something. And the wizard just looks at him and goes, duh, how would it work if it didn't mean anything? So the words that were scientific in our world become magic spell words. Yeah, there's a great bit where there's quizzing is like two wizards are quizzing each other to see if they're good enough wizards. And it's like, what is the means by which objects may fly through the air unaided? Anti-gravity. It's just dropped in there.
Oh man. I think one of the things that I like, again, I'm going to keep going back to Terry Pratchett because there's so much that's funny there. But the trope that's subverted there that you're asking about is kind of this child of prophecy. And in Guards, there's this kid named Carrot who, he checks all of the boxes, and yet he's just like he's one of the guards. He just shows up and I haven't read through the whole Discworld yet, but he's just absolutely hilarious for me. He's raised by dwarves, and it's very apparent that he should be the rightful ruler of Ankh-Morpork. And when the time comes and Lord Vetinari is like, well, he's kind of looking at him like, is this going to happen or not? And Carrot basically walks away from recovering his lost kingdom, which is it's very different than you think about the Tolkien myth. But I have to throw this one in here because this just cracked me up. But it's a Pratchett. Give a man a fire and he's warm for a day, but set him on fire and he'll be warm for the rest of his life. And it's so wrong that you might not be able to get away with that outside of fantasy, but you can get away with it in fantasy, and especially if you're Terry Pratchett. And so it's that kind of, we're talking tropes and reversals. That reversal of everybody knows, give a man a fish. So he sets it up perfectly. He borrows, and then it's like something terribly wrong. And
that's actually a very quippy, it's very similar to the way that Mark Twain set up his jokes in the way that you start with something that and then you do something that is unexpected for the ending there. And
speaking of funny fantasy, right? Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, when all the knights come rolling out on bicycles. That's funny. It's that unexpected, here's this, very proper society. And by the way, the wizard's the bad guy. And then, all the knights decide that bicycles are much better than maintaining these horses. So
start to feed them.
That's basically the definition of subverted trope, though. You start out with something that everybody recognizes, the trope, and then you do something different with it. You take it in a different direction. You set a man on fire.
You set a man on fire. I feel like I need to read this quote because only Scott laughed, and so I'm going to punish you guys with it again. But I wrote this one down because this is absolutely my favorite Terry Pratchett quote. He's talking about Sam Vimes is just like coming out of his drunken stupor, and he goes into this place to get some food, and he says, you know, the food was good solid stuff for a cold morning, all calories and fat and protein, and maybe a vitamin crying softly because it was all alone. Sorry.
That's fantastic.
Also in that series, you get the line about there's like when we caught thieves back home, we used to hang them up by the what? The town hall.
Yeah. Unmet expectations.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Those are all really good examples. Talking a little bit more about the craft of actually writing humor yourself. So we got some really excellent examples and a few ideas about how authors do this. But what if you're setting out to write a humorous story or situation? What are some do's and don'ts? How do you approach that?
We actually, I participate in the League of Utah Writers, and we recently had a workshop with Angie Hodap, who's an acquiring agent. I don't remember her title exactly, but she talked about how there's kind of the market tends not to do urban fantasy anymore. They call it contemporary fantasy, and sort of the snarky character, the hot girl in the black outfit who makes quips isn't as popular anymore because we've kind of done that a bit. And to me, it brought to mind the concept or the idea of a character who's snarky versus a character who's just kind of a jerk. And so for me, when writing dialogue or writing characters, you have to be really careful that when this person who's making remarks that you think are funny, is this person actually funny, or are they just being mean to everybody around them? Because and my other thought about that is, if you think about, like, I know a lot of people like Sherlock, but I don't like Sherlock because he's a jerk and he keeps getting away with stuff. But the one of the reasons we like him is because he's so talented. So if you have a character you don't like, but they've got redeeming qualities, like they're really talented, or they really like something or treasure someone, or if they have, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. The other one is like a very haughty character in a very humbling situation, like Doctor Strange. I got another Benedict Cumberbatch example, but this is somebody who's like, I'm the best, I'm the greatest, and then he gets in this terrible car accident, and now we can sympathize with him, and now it's okay that he was kind of a jerk at the beginning. So those were my jerk character thoughts.
That's excellent. Yeah, you have to give some connection to the character to make him redeeming in some way before you can make him too star. I think also about the TV show House. You got Hugh Laurie, where he treats everyone like terrible, but he's also he has his endearing side. So, and he is so brilliant that you latch onto him.
Also a Sherlock character, yes.
Oh yeah.
Well, there is a redeeming quality about, you know, kind of the haughty, proud character, the one who dishes it, because it's also an opportunity to strike back, right? Nobody feels bad. There's a person, and I've heard it described as a comic drop, right? I think that's how Howard Taylor describes it. But there's a person that you can throw to the wolves. You can throw them under the bus, right? So they're super haughty, and then somebody makes fun of them, even if it's, you know, the Dark Lord and it's behind his back. You know, that my kids and I just watched. This is dating. We watched Hercules, and there's this part where, you know, at the very end, where Hades is in the river Styx, and the demons are like, oh, if is good, you know, because they don't know if he's going to be able to come out of that. And I think, you know, if you create a Sherlock Holmes, or if you create somebody that is just completely an irritant, then it's fun sometimes to see them irritate other people, but it's also fun to see them, you know, get their just desserts.
Their comeuppance. Okay, excellent. So other do's and don'ts for actually writing humorous material. So we talked about, you know, the difference between snark and being, witty, I guess you could say. What are some other thoughts?
I think that one of the do's for writing humorous material is, at least my experience has been, I've never gotten my sort of straight up characters in so much trouble as I've gotten my humorous characters. I mean, it's almost like the whole I Love Lucy, where she's trying to get, I forget what it is, but there's a conveyor belt and it just keeps piling up. Yeah. And she keeps trying desperately to catch up with it. And I find that just dumping piles of crap on my characters and making them try to juggle the chainsaws as they come down on his head, that's generally where the humor starts to come from. I've also noticed one of the insights I had reading Jim Butcher, whose Harry Dresden books remind me a bit of Pratchett in just the sense that he can take you from heartbreaking to laughing and back so fast. But I noticed this is a technique that he often uses. Harry starts out with one trouble, but by the time he's into chapter 3, he's got 3 problems to solve by the end of the book, and they, often they're all interrelated, but at the time you're just like, holy crap, it's just falling on his head.
Give your characters more than they can handle. Yeah.
Yeah. So you give them more than they can handle and make them flounder around, and there's some humorous potential in that.
Actually, I like how we're talking about, we have like characterization humor, but also then situational humor. There are different ways that you can tweak this to make things funny.
Yeah, actually, when I was with that, I was actually thinking about Phineas and Ferb. I don't know if that counts as fantasy, but I'm thinking about the person's backstory, how it is about as traumatic and horrible as possible to the point of, and beyond the point of possibility, because apparently neither of his parents even showed up for his birth. Like stories like that. Where it's so over the top. But I also want to go back. I think that there's humor in understated responses and understated situations, or understated responses to absolutely absurd situations. And my example of this is from the new Star Wars, the sequel series, where you see Kylo Ren throwing a tantrum and 2 stormtroopers turn the corner, see what's happening, and then just turn around and no troopers. Where I think there's a lot of humor where in fantasy, especially, where we expect people to be heroic, we expect people to step up or do something really cool, and then maybe they roll a nat 1 in the story. they're going to step up and do something really cool, and they absolutely fall on their face. Their sidekick or whatever kills the big monster and has to pull them out of a ditch somewhere. And that's funny too, because we expect the awesome. And maybe in this situation, the awesome is, well, not good. It's not as funny.
I think too, for me, I think I find that understated humor in the works of Tolkien. And you think about in The Hobbit, right, where there are these 13 rough and tough dwarves who've come to look for a thief, and then they come upon some trolls, and what's the first thing they do? It's not let's go take these trolls on. It's like, let's send the smallest, least experienced person to go handle these 3 big trolls. So you have this. It's very well, this one's a little bit more obvious, and then you have Gandalf. What are they doing at the end of it? They're arguing about how they're going to eat the dwarves, and so again, it's a little bit dark. But the other one from Tolkien that I absolutely love, and you might not find this very funny, but again, it's this understated this humor, where you have Eowyn, and she's just been unhorsed, and she's standing in front of her uncle who is dying, and King Theoden, and the Nazgul comes in, and the Witch King comes in, and he makes this big speech about nobody can stop me. Let's see. A sword rang as it was drawn. Do what you will, but I will hinder it if I may. Hinder me, thou fool. No living man may hinder me. Then Mary heard of all sounds in that hour the strangest. It seemed that Durnhelm laughed, and the clear voice was like the ring of steel. But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. And that quiet humor for me is it's not the laugh out loud kind of humor that we talk about, but that was like when I remember reading that in the 4th grade and like having this big grin on my face as a 4th grader, smiling and thinking, oh, that's funny. That's so awesome that she gets to play that role. And so, sometimes we find humor in a little bit quieter or more understated or unexpected ways.
That's awesome. I like Tolkien. Tolkien uses his songs sometimes that he includes in his book for very humorous effect. Like when the dwarves are at Bilbo's house and they're singing, chip the glasses, crack the plates. That's what Bilbo Baggins, And of course they did none of these things,
Yeah. Or 15 birds and 5 fir trees, right? Like the goblins are singing about how they're going to roast these dwarves alive. It's again a little bit dark, but.
Or when Sam finds the trolls in Fellowship of the Ring and starts singing about old troll sat alone on a seat of stone. It's this whole kid song that's set to, I think it's The Fox Went Out on a Chilly Night, but it's about trolls and a guy who basically breaks his foot by kicking a troll's ass. And so that's. I mean, it's unexpected and a fairly gloomy part of the book, but it's a great laugh.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's something you can do really well with fantasy too. I think fantasy and songs and ballads, work really well together when it's done right. Are there any other authors you can think of who do that really well? That include the funny little songs or something, the bard or the whatever or singing.
This isn't fantasy, but I mean kind of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh yeah,
it's sci-fi and kind of fantasy. I mean,
really
there's some things that aren't explained. But the Vogons, the Vogon poetry.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I work for the government. That's extra funny to me.
Yeah. Well, just like poetry is supposed to be beautiful, and there are those lines in there about how there's only one poet that was even worse than the Vogons, and goes into detail about that poet before going into the Vogon poetry. Not really a ballad. Thank goodness it wasn't sung. They probably would have died. But same kind of feel.
Yeah,
the Asterix and Obelix has the minstrel who everybody's always tying up, and they're like, it's a French comic, and it's the minstrel, and nobody wants to hear him sing, which is kind of a role reversal. Not as funny as the Vogons, though, for sure.
No, it can't be the Vogons.
That's got me thinking of Monty Python and Holy Grail with the prince that just wants to sing.
Good father.
Fatherland.
Well, but they do have the songs with the Knights of the Round Table. We dance whenever we're able.
With footwork.
Let's not go to Camelot. It is a silly place.
That's awesome.
Here's another do for writing humor. I mean, this is a do for any sort of writing, is to have a critique group or a writing group to comment on things, but especially with humor, to be able to bounce ideas off. Because a lot of humor, if you're talking stand-up comedy or things like that, it is very much a collaborative effort. And what you think is funny might not actually be funny outside of your head. And sometimes you write something and you don't think it's funny, or you weren't meaning for it to be funny, and someone reads it and says, this is hilarious. It's good to have a critique group or a writing group, or at least ask the beta readers, if you really mean for something to be funny, to say, hey, can you tell me if you laugh at any point in this? Not point out the joke, because that's not going to help. But yeah.
Well, and one thing too that helps you with is, I remember working with Allison and the other guy in our writing critique, like telling a joke in the story and having Mike say, oh, this could be a lot funnier if, and then Allison saying, well, what if you tweak it this way? And so you kind of stack up this joke that's, you had a joke, it was funny, but now it has a bigger impact because you've emphasized the comic drop or called things into sharper contrast. So it was easier to see and taken out the extra words because you can, like I'm doing right now, kill a joke by putting too many words in.
I was gonna what I found to be the most helpful, if you can get this, is for someone to read to you the thing that you wrote, because then you know exactly where they were and you can hear involuntary laughter. Because what I found with critique groups is sometimes I'll be like, well, mark this and mark that, and I get it back, and then they didn't do what I asked at all. But if they're just reading it out loud, then I can tell when they found something funny. And I found that even like one of the best things was I went to a writing conference and had somebody I didn't know in the writing industry read like my first couple pages. And then hearing that kind of, I was like, hey, I made you laugh. Now you have to buy it. Now you have to buy this book. I mean, hopefully you get more than just like a little chuckle, but that was one of the things I never really thought of myself as like, I'm not necessarily trying to write humor or be a humor author, but enough people would describe my work as being humorous. I'm like, I should probably just like make that, it's not a bug, it's a feature type situation.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Well, we only have about 8 minutes left. So let's check, see if we have any questions from the audience. Gwen.
We do indeed. So, first of all, from Resume, writing a book that is intended to be humorous is one thing. What about inserting comedy where it would be unexpected? In a story that is written as a sci-fi survival adventure, can a funny chapter be added to change the pace, or as a relief before a scene that is horrifying? Is that a good idea? And do any of you on the panel know of any examples?
I don't know of any examples, but if this is a survival novel, you have people, and people, when they are in stressful situations, will often use humor to kind of decompress. This is another theory of humor.
Mechanism.
Again, explaining theories of humor makes it not as funny. But in my class, we talk about how Freud is involved, so we won't go into that. But when you are uncomfortable, when you are stressed, when a terrible thing happens, I mean, for crying out loud, at my father's funeral, we were laughing and making jokes, referencing Monty Python, the dead parrot sketch, because it was a dead parent. And I know, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But like,
fine.
Oh no, I mean, you're like, that's a coping mechanism,
it's
right?
a coping mechanism. So in a survival situation, these are humans, unless they're not humans, but we want them to be personable and relatable. In stressful situations, humor will always come and make an appearance, because that is something that humans need.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like Marvel movies, like even the ones that were really, really serious, they always have those little moments of humor. Even the ones that are not as lighthearted, Guardians of the Galaxy or whatever. Even the most serious ones, they find little ways to make you laugh once in a while. Even, especially like you think of even like Endgame, where things are really going down and people are dying, but that they still have the little funny moments to make it more palatable.
Well, the quips in the big battle in Civil War. You guys ever seen this really old movie, The Empire Strikes Back?
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? Any more to that one, or do we have another question?
I was just going to say that I think that readers need palate cleansers every so often. I think that if you have a story that's just oppressively dark and intense, then it's possible to stop feeling that intensity. Whereas if you ramp up intensity and then drop down, add in some humor and just relieve the tension, then the next time you bring in tension, it's going to feel new again instead of just this oppressive, tiring slog. So yeah, use humor.
Great point.
For a specific example, Hamlet has a gravedigger scene, like right before like a bunch of intense stuff's happening, and then these gravediggers who have nothing to do with what's going on come by and start chatting. Comic relief is a really important thing, especially in heavy stories, to, like Allison mentioned, break it up so it's not so heavy.
Where's Polonius? At supper? Not where he eats, but where he is eaten.
I liked, I as a kid, I remember and this isn't science fiction, so I could probably do a better job of this, but the Dragonlance novels, like Dragonlance Chronicles, there's a character, Tasselhob Burfoot, who's basically a child who's an adult. It's a race of very irritating kleptomaniacs, and every time they're in a bad situation, Tasselhoff will either make it better or make it a whole lot worse by doing something silly or stupid. And so I think, like, you can do anything if you do it well. And so going back to what the other panelists have said, try it out, have some beta readers check it out, see if you can turn the set screws a little bit and make it better, because people will appreciate having a break from the dreary.
Just make sure that that it's not a complete slap in tone where it gives them whiplash from having it come out of nowhere. And
that's where gallows humor works so well, it's like, you got the character who can't shoot the whole, and in the end, he shoots the villain, and the villain's like holding his chest and is like, oh, your aim got better, and it's like, that's the only shot that the protagonist has made the whole movie, the only good shot, and the villain recognizes it and calls attention to it, and it's not funny, but it's kind of funny because he's dying, and yet the thing that his last words are, oh, I see you've been practicing, or something like that.
All right, so next question before we wrap up is, how about slapstick in writing? I know it's a physical humor venue, but can you think of any literary examples?
Yeah, that's definitely tougher. Yeah.
That is a bit tougher, but I do want to say, if you have... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Terry Pratchett plays it for laughs with the clowns, who are funny specifically because they're not funny. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, in situations where you can very clearly visualize something that's hilarious, that's something you want to go for. So I wrote a story about a funny situation where it's if you had a reality TV show where you have MMA fighters, but they also have to bake bread, and they're judged by whether their bread is good as well as whether they can beat the other guy up. And I was trying to figure out how to make they have challenges. So if they lose a round of fighting, they have to do something that's going to make their bread baking harder. And so one of them is a character has to either lose his butter or something like that, or wear a Godzilla mask. And he chooses to wear the Godzilla mask. And I was just in my head, I had this hilarious picture of this like beefy, like heavyweight champion who's like wearing a Godzilla mask and trying to bake bread. And to me, that's like way better than trying to be like, okay, and for the penalty, it's something that's not as visual. Like I am trying to look for opportunities to use visual humor if possible, even though you're not seeing it, you're seeing it with your brain.
Sorry. So the slapstick, my best example is Sam Vimes' dragon in Guards, who is wired backwards, and so he can't fly very fast. But anyways, he blows fire out. No, I'm sorry. I've said all I want to say.
There's verbal slapstick and physical slapstick. And so you can use both effectively. I'd say that like the slipping on the banana peel isn't going to fly as well as it would in real life, mostly because there isn't much physics in books. But the doing something where it's a very visual cue, so like the Godzilla mask would work fairly well. Or just ridiculous, absurd situations, honestly.
Yep. Well, great. I think we are out of time, but I appreciate all of your insight. That was an excellent discussion. Yeah, thanks so much. And good luck with all your writing endeavors.